We'll get started. That's fine. So we thought for this session, we've always brought in guests from really outside of Lisa, and we've had some very, very good sessions as a result. But we thought, oh my goodness, we've got so much great talent and resources. We're already helping Lisa and helping all of our founders to achieve their goals, that shame on us for not doing something like this earlier. And a perfect example, of course, are Alina Adams as well as Stephen Aporta, who've been a big part of Lisa almost since the beginning. If any of you have attended any of the pitch practice sessions, you see them there almost every time, offering very, very good input to the founders, really being trusted advisors, and just being just a wealth of knowledge. And it just amazes me at not only just how helpful they've both been, but just how generous they've been with their time. And it's just amazing. And again, we're all so grateful for that. So with that, I'd like to introduce Alina and Stephen and have them spend a few minutes just really talking about their backgrounds and their journey to get to where they are. Maybe Alina, if you want to go first. Like, for instance, I know that you started in biotech at Stanford, and you went from that to being a serial entrepreneur and an innovator and everything else. So
this is the
okay. So yeah, if you just want to introduce yourself, Alina, maybe talk a little bit about your experience. I'm sure it's relatable to a lot of the people in this room who are looking to emulate what you've done.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever you are. So I'm going to briefly go about my background, but I believe we have a Q&A session after some time, so you can ask me more questions about my experience or anything else. I'm pretty open book. I do not like to talk about myself, just FYI, but if you have any questions and it's helpful, I'll be happy to answer that. So as Edward mentioned, I do have a biotech background. I actually have applied physics degree. I'm originally from Ukraine, so I moved into the United States in 2004. So it was way before all the conflicts started. My first job was at Stanford Bioengineering Department. I worked with Professor Stephen Quick in his lab, and I worked there for a few years and wanted to work on something, I guess, more big or more ambition. I wanted just to try new things and see what works out. So I left Stanford when I co-founded my first company. It was a complete bootstrap. We wrote some apps and it started generating revenue. So once we started getting some money, I realized, okay, well, there's maybe more to that than just a gig on the side. So I left Stanford. And this was a big shift into entrepreneurship. Before then, I was just pure engineer at the background. I had engineering masters and general engineering, focused on industrial systems engineering. So I had zero business background. Once I got into entrepreneurship with the first company, I realized I need to get something. So I went to get an MBA just so I can understand financial statements, marketing, why we need sales and marketing. We had people buying our product and I had no idea why they're doing that. So I needed to understand more about, besides being an engineer and building great products, like how can you sell the product and why do you need sales and marketing in general? So that was a big shift for me, going in from complete, I want to say, lab person, researcher, engineer into business. When I was working on my MBA, I got into this different entrepreneurship network connections, clubs. I was elected club of for entrepreneurship, president of entrepreneurship network at Santa Clara University, where I got my MBA. It was an evening program, so I could still work with my company and at the same time get MBA. So it way before Stanford offered any executive program, so we could now work and get this experience at the same time, getting some business background as well. So when I got my MBA, I really got into entrepreneurship. I saw the opportunity. Well, okay, well, not only you can build products now, I know how to sell them and how to apply these practices. When I got into the entrepreneurship, I actually worked on, after my first company, I worked on other projects that never become companies, but just part of the experience, the learning experience. They'll also be happy to talk about if there are any questions. And if anything, it's exploration. You explore, you try different things, you work with different people. I wrote a thesis on venture capital as part of my MBA because I wanted to get into venture capital industry. During my thesis, I interviewed a lot of venture capitalists. So that was my good way into VC network as well. And I got to work with venture capitalists, so I understood their mindset. And that was all very helpful for my follow-on companies and my recent company, Art Violi, where I raised funds as, from angel investments, from grants, from venture capitalists. So I had this kind of multi-dimensional experience from starting off with a software development company. I do have one nonprofit company, the organization that I started years back. And my recent one is a combination of a hardware company and the clean tech space. There are some elements of a biotech from my background, but now it's almost 100% positioned into clean tech and carbon removal company. So that's kind of like my number one priority. And aside from that, because I love teaching and I love giving back to the community and, as you know, to this group of people. I teach at Northeastern University, one class in entrepreneurship, and I'm also deeply rooted with social entrepreneurship. So I teach, I was teaching at Santa Clara University social entrepreneurship class to help social entrepreneurs with their businesses. Some background noise. Okay. To scale their ventures. So I worked with the very super early startup companies, as well with the growth stage companies. And just by my nature and working with different organizations, I mentor at Global Social Benefit Institute. That's the kind of hub for social entrepreneurs. And the European Innovation Academy. They're based in Europe, and they have yearly program for entrepreneurs. So through that kind of network, I get to work with a lot of people. I get to meet a lot of people. It's an amazing opportunity for me to personally develop, learn, and grow by seeing different challenges. And if I can be of help to someone, that just gives me a lot of personal kind of validation to be helpful to people and contribute to, to overall greater good. So that's a bit about me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alina. So Stephen, I know a little bit more about yours, and it's very fascinating as well. If you'd like to go ahead and maybe tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Thank you all for coming, and any other more specific questions I can answer, I'd be glad to. So I think from an entrepreneurial or innovation perspective, it's always been something that's been in my blood. I think being the only left-handed person in the home, growing up, I was already sort of the black sheep. In my family, there were a lot of successful business people, bankers, a lot of corporate folks. I was one of the few that wasn't necessarily convinced that that was my path from the very beginning. In middle school, I got kicked out. The only reason why I got kicked out of school was because I was selling candy, and I wasn't supposed to. So that was sort of the first entrepreneurial activity that got me not expelled, but thrown out for a day. Then in the university, I sort of felt bad because my parents were paying full out-of-state tuition at University of Virginia. I was studying economics and environmental engineering. And I also decided that I was going to make those degree in concentration as much of a liberal arts education as I could, because I wanted to learn about a lot of things that I had the sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach that I may not see some of these topics in my life in the business world, looking at it from the perspective of a 19 or 20-year-old. So I got into a lot of trouble because I was taking courses in 4 different schools in the university, and they wrote letters to my parents, and my parents said, you know, do whatever you want. Don't worry, we'll deal with them. So I actually took one course in the architecture school, sitting in the stairways until they kicked me out because it was a fire hazard. So the idea was always to learn more, to understand more. I worked with a student council. I worked with a lot of clubs. I founded a club for specifically for sports. But one of the things I also took on a job that paid about $4 an hour at the university library, and I also developed an allergy to the books, so I was constantly sick. And I realized that job wasn't going to work. So I moved to become a full-time cook at a restaurant, and well, part-time. And then I realized that was too hard to do. And the other cook, for some reason, didn't like me and tried to knock me out with a block of cheese once. And that really didn't work either. I had a friend who was also entrepreneurial like me, and we actually decided to buy, with the little credit that we had at age 19 or 20, buy computers, upgrade them, and resell them, almost like a hardware provider. That's when the lights went on in terms of the business and the entrepreneurial piece, where you could actually make real money. What I was making one semester, I made in 1.5 hours. So basically, I was one of the highest paid students, making about $700 an hour doing this computer work. Long story short is that for a student that doesn't have business capacity or capability or money, it's sort of difficult to start a business. Today, the sort of resources that all of you have were somewhat non-existent when I was that age. We applied to become a reseller, and when we were asked for our assets, we produced credit cards, and that wasn't quite enough. So we couldn't actually become a licensed reseller. So that was one dream gone. Point being that once I graduated, I got back into the corporate world. My first was with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Did a lot of work in corporate finance. I worked in about 8 or 9 different industries, petroleum, logistics, and I'm trying to remember all of them, banking, credit card processing, and all of that work was mostly in the US. So I decided I wanted to spend a little bit more time outside of the US, since I had originally been born in Colombia, lived in Argentina and Brazil, and I kind of wanted to go back and sort of visit where I came from. So I took a job with Accenture. And as I was working at Accenture, I also realized that there were a lot of other developments, things going on through the different networking groups. This is pre-meetups and whatnot, that was indicating to me that I was more interested in being an entrepreneur and moving at a different pace. Something about working with others that had similar dreams and not necessarily a path laid out was very interesting to me. So really, my life has been, without very much planning, it's something that happened very much in my young life to be an entrepreneur, and I didn't quite fully understand it until later on in life. From there have been a lot of twists and turns. I was part of the .com movement, did start a company, had some very interesting stories of people's perception of value of our company. I also started an investment fund. I invested in 2 companies, one of which was purchased and one of which still exists today. And this is more than 20 years ago. And since then, I've been working on a lot of different types of ventures, working a lot with other people that have small businesses that are trying to grow, that are trying to create something. They don't necessarily feel that they have the skills. One of the things that always marks my, when I look back, is understanding how difficult it was to find the right mentorship. I had corporate mentorship and family, but small business mentorship was really tough at that time, especially when we were in the tech sector and there weren't that many people around me who were involved. Fast forward a little bit, I started another company in South America with two partners. We offered legal and financial advisory services to many telecom companies, the Argentine National Congress, many other businesses, retail, internet businesses. We had a beautiful blue chip portfolio until we had a massive devaluation, which basically just blew up the currency. At that point, there wasn't much for me to do since I was always working in dollar-pegged economies. I came back to the US and sort of rebuilt from there. So I started doing consulting work again in private sector, and I made a pitch to a company in the retail catastrophic damage division. Imagine FEMA in the private sector, and the division management, literally, they couldn't get farther away from the project. They were totally against it. So I was so mad, I decided I would pitch my own hat to build this business and manage it. I did that for 5 years until about 2010, from 2004 to 2010. And that was a very successful business. It had regional scope, not national, here in the US. Taught me a lot of lessons about building business and doing things your way and having the confidence to do things that you want to do and that you believe in. But these are all cumulative experiences. And I always want to encourage entrepreneurs to look at the glass half full. Most of your days will be complicated, will be difficult. They're not always going to shine. So I encourage, in that experience, in that flow of events, as you live your life and you live your experience, that you really stop and smell the flowers. Currently, I've been running a consulting company for about 12 years now that is dedicated about 80% of our clients in public sector, 20% in private sector, including .coms and others, small businesses. I work a lot with small business administration. I work with local charities. And the other that I like to do also is I've also put my hat in developing IoT networks and investing in some other blockchain projects that are currently ongoing. Thank you.
No, thank you, Stephen. So I think it implied, and neither of you really, well, I mean, you're both very humble people. Neither of you really mentioned, just sounds like a heck of a lot of hard work that you consistently put in and dedicate. And I had two questions that I'll combine into one here. And as a reminder, if you've got anything, to please put it in the chat, and we'll have a little Q&A session here later, of course, depending upon what sort of questions we get. But the first part of the question is, what really inspires you now compared to back when you were really starting your journey, professionally? And also, when you look at so many successful entrepreneurs, there's always that sense of divine discontent, right? You can't rest on your laurels. You always have to be moving forward, fail quickly, move on, pivot if you must, everything else. But do you agree that you've got to have that divine discontent? And if so, how do you really manage to find time to recognize your success without becoming complacent, or at least the fear that you're becoming complacent? How you really address those things to keep moving forward. Alina?
Sure, those are really great questions. So first one, on the inspiration part, what inspired me before versus what inspired me now. When I started just going in entrepreneurship with my first company, I had really no idea what I was doing. Well, for the most part, I still don't know what I'm doing, but I have at least a better idea in terms of what I like to do. So as you get yourself in entrepreneurship, you realize that you have a choice. I mean, we can choose the work that we, the employer that we work for, but you have a choice of to do what you actually love to do. So there's a lot of self-discovery and reflection, understanding what you care about, what is important to you. Because when you get yourself into something which is long-term commitment without guarantee you're going to get any type of return, success, or payback, you have to work long hours, you have to make sacrifices, you really have to love what you do. If you're just getting yourself for the money, for the fame, for some, awards or something, it's gonna be brutal. It's gonna be really, really hard. So for me, early on, I tried to figure out what is it that I love to do, what do I care about, looking at my core values, and where I got myself into right now is a combination of, if you've heard this Japanese concept ikigais, of things that you love, things that you're good at, things that people need. So there's a combination of things, and for the most part, I care about people, I care about the environment, and I love animals. So for me, all of my journey and my companies and projects that I worked on, they had something to do with that. So the latest company, Artvioli, it's a clean tech company focusing on carbon reduction. So it's overall, trying to help with climate change, and which also has bad effects on all environments and people and animals. So that's I kind of got myself into. But as Stephen mentioned, it is a journey. There's a lot of self-discovery. Once you get yourself into something, you find out things that you never knew about yourself. And there are things that you understand that you like, things that you will understand about yourself, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you're not good at. And this is where you can take the most of the learning and part of the journey to actually figure out what do you want in life. And we have amazing courses at Stanford that also help me kind of solidify this picture and continue to work on this progress. But at least for me, I don't have regrets and feeling like, oh, I'm sacrificing my personal life, because I do what I love. If I have this meeting, if I have, even the challenging meetings with crazy time fundraising, I know that I do what I love and I care about the purpose of why I'm doing this. So it makes things easier. So then for the second part, the second question is about this recognizing of success, pivoting, moving on, the projects. If you do what you love, even if the project fails, basically doesn't go anywhere, you will never feel like a failure, because you spend your time doing things that you loved. If you're working on something just to trying to make money and it didn't work, you're going to feel horrible, because that was your kind of like the purpose of why you were doing things. So the bigger question of why you do this is very important for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for everything that you do. So if you have this core of like, why I'm doing this, and you love what you do, even if you have these challenges, even if you have pivots, it's gonna, it's not going to be as devastating. It's not going to be as important, because you worked on something. And I know people who worked like a decade on something and it didn't work out. Well, you guess what? For the 10 years, he employed people, he made impact, he created value, he made a dent. So he feels, even though the business is shut down, which a lot of businesses get shut down after some time, he still doesn't feel like a failure. He contributed to the community, to the society, and he did something that he loved to do. So I have that mentality of doing something that you love. The part of the success, the recognition of success. So number one, if you're in the startup world, which I am, success is really hard to define from just financial metrics, because you have to be a high growth company for a really long time, and then you have to sustain growth, which is also very hard. So I reflect success on the people who work with me. If I see that people who work with me, they're successful, then I gotta be successful too. So it's more of a reflection, not so much of financial metrics, because if you're going to be chasing some next milestone, and then, okay, if I get that, then I'm successful, because there's going to be another one, another, and it's a constant. And especially in the VC world, you constantly have to set up like high growth company, which is really, really high stress, and it's a hard thing to do. So there's different perspectives how you can define success. In my perspective, it's the people that I work with, the impact that I am creating, then people creating, the companies creating. And that's of course combination with, you know, financial performance will show you and determine you, okay, well, I'm doing something that's worthy, I'm doing something that's important, and people who work for me also, you know, they're successful, they're happy, and to me that's what matters.
Very, very cool. Stephen, anything to add to that in your experience? You're on mute.
I would generally agree with that. I think that sometimes it's good to be able to express how you feel. Sometimes I wish, you know, if you see in the spy movies, you have that cone of silence. If you could go in there and say everything that you want to say, and it could just stay in that protected glass, and then you can walk out feeling better. Sometimes it's some of the situations will test you. They will test you. They will aggravate. They might affect your confidence. These situations happen to all of us. We're human. We're not perfect. Don't feel that you're less or there's something wrong because you don't necessarily succeed in a particular aspect. There's always ways to improve. You can give it a little bit of time and then get up and keep moving forwards, right? I forget which movie. I think it was one of the Rocky movies where probably the only thing I remember from any of the Rocky movies is it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you can get hit and keep moving forwards. And sometimes it really is like that. You're just getting beaten in the corner and nothing's working out. You just have to kind of slow down, close your eyes for a moment and see what. Don't forget that your abilities and your creativity and your network of people are the ones that got you where you are. Sometimes you have to just lean back, get out of the chaos, find your quiet place, and maybe meditate and kind of visualize some potential solutions and outcomes when crisis hits, right? And I also recommend it for visioning future outcomes, even if crisis doesn't hit. Thank you.
That's some great input. So one of the best parts for me, at least with Lisa, is, you know, just seeing everyone coming in with their ideas and just seeing how they evolve. Sometimes just dramatically, and both of you are often, or if not always, a big part of that by advising, you know, our startups via the pitch practice sessions and everything else. So Stephen, I'll stick with you this time, so Alina has a little time to think of an answer. But maybe you could give an example or two of, you know, either just a mistake that you feel comfortable talking about now, or else some really massive pivot that you had to make, either in one of your own businesses or you know, another business that you consulted for that you know, has been a great learning experience and also helped that company achieve far greater success than if they just kept going down the same path.
Okay, so I would say the pivots happen all the time. I would say that one pivot probably due to more macro reasons. When I started this company with two partners in South America, I mentioned the devaluation, massive devaluation, the economic crisis, worked a lot in third world, and I've seen things come and go. So one pivot moment was we have 47 employees. We have a $5 million valuation. A company by the name of Holland and Knight, a letter of intent to buy a portion of our company. I've got the letter on my desk and I'm watching the news and seeing how the currency is literally going into a spiral downwards. And I'm just thinking for a moment, you know, I've never experienced this from a business perspective. This is a while ago, but you know, when we see inflation, at least in global inflation now, it's really affecting other countries, whereas in some of the first world it's affecting a lot less, but they still act like it's a crisis. It's not a crisis until you're putting 12 zeros behind your currency. I had no way to be able to transact my services as a consultant. And we're talking about blue chip companies, the likes of Sprint or the petroleum companies like Exxon locally in the region. They had no way to pay us. They weren't willing to sign contracts. It was the greatest paralysis that I'd ever seen. And then the folks at Holland and Knight rescinded the offer. As I'm sitting at my desk, this happened in a 3-week period. At some point, I decided I had bought a round trip ticket, and I ended up only using one way to come back to the US. When I came back, I said, I don't know what I'm doing here. I know I can't do anything over there. And at some point, I was playing cards at 2 a.m. in February. I remember it was freezing cold, and I went out onto a balcony. I realized the business was over, and it almost hit me like a brick. And I didn't go back for another year. I just came back to the US to figure out, how do I restart something? Where do I restart when I've spent everything that I had in terms of capital? Everything I made was put into the business. We have partnerships in 5 countries. We have our clients. What do we do with this? How do we unwind it? How can we unwind it? I'd never unwound a business before. I had no idea where I was going. So I called my dad at around 2:33 in the morning, and I said, I'm going in all directions without a paddle. So that was one of the pivot moments. I really had no idea how to figure it out. Another important pivot moment was working in Brazil. We had, to make a long story short, after living a devaluation scenario, I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We happened to have an opportunity to work with infrastructure for telecom, building infrastructure in main cities, microwave and node deconstruction in cities on buildings. To make a long story short, building telecom network. One of the largest companies, Crown Castle, in this business offered us $300 million as a financial backing for our project. I couldn't believe that they had offered that much. Then I realized how much they had in play, and then I realized why that it was pennies for them. Point is, I start getting this feeling of currency devaluation, and myself and my partner, we walked away from the project because we knew within 2 years the currency was going to devalue and we were going to get hit massively. That's a business that makes money long term, not short term. And as much as it hurt for the second time, at least I didn't go through the rollers that one. But I always wonder what it would have been like to have spent 5 years developing that project, and the financial outcomes would have been fantastic. But every time you may have to make decisions like that, it hurts less because you know more. That's sort of some of the two key pivots. But I think you're pivoting every day, and you're repositioning your knowledge, and you're always trying to catch the top of the wave. You always have that mentality moving into situations. How can I be a forerunner? How can I be front and center? How can I reposition? It's something that you constantly have to do, whether it's tech, knowledge, how you service customers, how you see the market, always anticipating as much as you can. Thank you.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks, Stephen. Alina, same question. We talks about some pivots and some real learning experiences that you've had along the way.
Sure. So I didn't have, the big pivots, like 180 type of pivots. The usual corrections that Stephen mentioned, you do have to adjust. You have to kind of, like we say, not to go with the flow, go ahead of the flow, but you need to foresee, you need to be nimble, you need to understand who you are, where you are, but also where your market is or where the market is going, and any of the potential structural changes within the industry. So you do have to be kind of nimble and responsive to that. I was thinking the question about any kind of mistakes or examples that I've done early on with the last company, when I was just starting fundraising. And when you're early on in your fundraising, you're going to hear a lot of advice from different investors, mentors, advisors. They're going to be telling you different things. Some contradict each other, some support what your bias that you already have in your mind. And it is important to filter through all of that and to actually understand what is it that and what is important for you, for your company, because you actually know better than anyone else, because you're supposed to be the expert in the industry, in the product, in the technology that you're working on. So if somebody's telling you that, oh, you should do this or you should do that, yeah, those are great ideas. And early on with my technology that I developed, there's a lot of different applications and there's a lot of different opinions, which direction I should go with that technology, what type of product I should build and what market I should go after. And I've myself done a lot of research. But of course, when you talk to big investors who have big checks and big banks, when they tell you something, it's like, oh yeah, maybe that's what I should be doing. And I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe that's, I was doubting I was listening, but also kind of like, okay, well, maybe they know better. But in reality, like, they don't know better. They have their own biases, they have their own interests, they have their own perspectives, but sometimes they may not be aligned with what actually you're doing. So early on, my mistake is to trying to fit my company for the investor mindset. And early on, when I get a meeting with investor, I would take all the meetings initially, and I would spend so much of my time. I wasted so much of my time with investors. They're actually not a good fit. So at some point, I learned that not every investor is going to be your investor, and you're going to hear a lot of rejections because just the nature of fundraising. What they say about like 60, 70, meetings or funds you have to go through before you get one check. So imagine like you have to get 60, 70 rejections before you actually get one positive. That's a lot. If you think about for your mental kind of stability, mental toughness, constantly getting rejection after rejection, that's actually could be pretty big toll on you. So you have to stick with what what you're comfortable with, and saying no to investors. And once I learned how to say no to investor, because I was afraid of saying no because I thought they know better, but I realized they don't know any better. I know better, and I know what the company needs. I started saying no to investors, and I did not take some of the investment offers. The example, the mistake, some of the investors that I got were strategic investors. I had a long discussions and negotiations on the terms where it didn't end up anywhere, but I was left with like tens of thousands of legal fees from my legal team to negotiate those deals. So I learned is no, you have to figure out for yourself if that's a potentially good investor or not, and saying no yourself early on, or just getting them straight to fast no, is actually better for you and for your company, rather than having long discussions follow on and so on and so. So that was one of my earlier mistakes that hopefully might be relevant to some of you, because you might be fundraising soon. So you really need to be picky with investors, so you don't waste your time and they don't waste your time, and you don't spend a lot of money on legal fees negotiating deals.
That's a good book idea, Getting to Know.
Yes. Getting to know, yes.
So Alina, let's stick with you. This is the final question I've jotted down, at least, and then we can go to Q&A. Again, please put your questions in there, and then we've got one good one in there now. But you look at all great leaders as well as great mentors, like both of you. You have great mentors and people to assist and bounce ideas off of and be trusted advisors. How did you find those people? Maybe like if there's a story as far as someone who's just really irreplaceable, who's been there for you. How did that relationship evolve and come about, and where did you find that person?
So that's a very good question on the mentors, and I want to I wanted to emphasize this is so important to have a support system for you, especially when you have tough situations. In my Rolodex early on, coming in, starting after my MBA, after establishing some of the network with VCs, I had a group of people that I knew if I have a term sheet, I can send it out to a few of my investor folks to give me feedback and tell me if that's a deal or if that's not a deal. So it's important to have people in your support system network, which could be investors, it could be industry experts, it could be peer friends, entrepreneurs, startups, who also in the same sector. So having them in not one person who will do all for you, but specific people that you know you can talk to for a specific topic. It could be wellness coaching. It could be something human HR related questions. It could be industry questions, but you'll have different people for different topics. Sorry, my 2-year-old just came in the room, so you might hear her. But you'll have different people for different topics where you need to talk to someone, because there's not going to be one person that you're going to go for all the questions. So have that network as part of that, your network as you go on your journey. Just one second. Yes, that's the real life. So having that person within your network is super important. And for me, as when I got in my MBA, the professors, the advisors, the network that I was expanding, I was kind of like picky selecting and finding the people that I have connection with. Amelia, and then, yes, say hi. Hi. Okay, go. Then you have those folks when you need them. And I want to say the overall Stanford executive program was super amazing for me, because I met so many people just, for sanity check, for connections. Just connecting with each other here is just invaluable. So you might find your peer network, peer mentors for yourself just within our community that we have here. So that's one of the ways how you can get mentors.
Great, thanks, Alina. So Stephen, you mentioned that back in the early tech days, it was difficult to find those mentors, but it also sounds like you have a pretty good mentor in your father as well. But anyone else who, and how did you find that relationship?
Sure. So I think the mentorship comes from many different angles, and depending on where you are in your life and career and age, they could be from different directions. I would say that I have a lot of friends from different walks of life. One is an accomplished chef. One is a brilliant mathematician. One is the general group of friends in my let's say the oldest group of friends is most of them are now in C-suite positions with small and large companies. I also feel that you can find inspiration talking to people, inspiration and really mentorship, talking to people who do things that you don't do. I love to see the way, if I explain what I do to an artist, I love to see how they react. Or anybody who, in the medical field, ask them what a hard day is like after they've done 48 hours in the ER. And then ask yourself, did I really have a hard time today? Because I had sat at my desk for 14 hours and nobody died on my watch, right? So there's things that illuminate you. Sometimes there are ideas. My whole methodology behind what I do is that I'm not a specialist in one particular industry. I've worked in 12 industries, and I try to bring the best from each one using method as a common bond. But mentorship can come from many areas, from friends, from family, from people you don't know. Sometimes what you also get is with seasoned entrepreneurs, they have been in situations where they feel cornered. They may feel like they're in a puzzle, in one of these puzzles where they don't know where the exit is. And oftentimes that generates, when you hear those stories and what they had to do, it often requires you to bring your level of fear down and bring your willingness to risk up. You have to take the leap of faith, take that challenge, maybe turn yourself into a person, even if you're not that confident, fake it until you make it. Sometimes don't ask that many questions, take the leap of faith. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but indecision may be the biggest problem that you face. And most of the, today I'm fortunate because company mentors, I have a retired 2-star general that managed most of the NATO alliance, or a good part of NATO alliance. And I have another seasoned executive from SAIC who managed multi-billion-dollar accounts with small businesses. So at least from a business perspective, I think I align with the right people, but inspiration is really everywhere, and the attention to detail and why people do certain things, the labor of love. Why does that doctor sit in a 48-hour ER in the most uncomfortable situations? They do it because they love what they do. And that brings strength and realize, maybe bring you back to basics on certain things.
No, thank you. Thank you again, Stephen. So one of the questions in the chat is from Anjun. Anjun, do you want to go ahead and ask?
Sure. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Edward. And thank you, Alina and Stephen. Great insights, great lead questions too. I've learned a lot. And the demo day 2, you both gave really valuable feedback, in particular on what we are doing. So I have a more general question, even though it would be great to be a little bit specific for the fintech, but if you could just give some general insights into in terms of the difference between B2B and B2C. As I mentioned a little bit last time, we were still thinking whether this should be a B2B, us building some tools and platform in the fintech area and feed into financial advisors, as opposed to facing directly to end users, the millennials and Gen Z. So again, you don't have to be very specific, but great to hear your insights in terms of the nuances in terms of the B2B versus B2C. Thank you.
So I guess I could start. Would you like me to start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I would say that I think Alina sort of addressed that parts of that question last time in terms of the amount of research, sort of that general homework of research in understanding those possible customer segments. What I would also say is that if you're not sure which segment works for you, why not approach both with the question? Ask them if they would pay for the service. So a lot of this comes down to basics. Where you put the lemonade stand and sell the lemonade, have to ask people if they're willing to pay for it in whatever shape or form of the type of services that you're offering. That's the most direct way I can tell you. There's a lot of nuances. There's different services. There's supporting services that you can offer, but I would fundamentally start there. If you ask enough people, you'll be able to formulate an opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, frankly, Anil is going to ask a question, and I think it might actually be a sort of a similar answer, but I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. So Anil, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute actually.
Okay.
Thank you so much, guys. I think excellent speaker series. I really thank the speakers on behalf of the LEAP program also and the Galvanizer cohort. So a specific question to Alina actually, how do we decide on a business, right? There's so many ideas to brainstorm. How do you select an idea, and how do you select the product and the go-to-market? And what specific steps do we need to take in the process for any newbies who are actually getting into the entrepreneurship and into this process, especially? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. What idea to work on? I would first, and I'm going to speak from my last company experience, how I started the last company, because the previous companies, there was either a good team, we didn't know what we were working on, so we brainstormed, we decided to work on something. There were some other external factors that contributed to my selection of a project or idea that I was working on. But the last company that I started, it was exactly reflecting of my personal interest combination with opportunity. So I was looking at, okay, well, what am I passionate about? Where can I make the biggest impact? And what am I good at? What can I do? What sounds interesting to me? And looking at the market industry, I've done a lot of market analysis and industry opportunity to see, okay, well, if just generally speaking, not a specific idea, just generally speaking, are you looking into gaming industry, finance industry, are you looking into biotech, whatever industry, would that industry have opportunity? Is that a growing industry? Are there any disruptors in the industry? So you just do kind of like if you're interested in that particular industry, what is the industry trend? Who are the bigger players? And just a general analysis of like, is it easy for new entrants to get into that industry? Have there been any disruptions in that industry? And then you kind of can brainstorm and look like, okay, well, that's the industry that I want to go into. Who has a problem? Who are the stakeholders? Before even the problem, who is the stakeholder? What are the entities? Maybe it's government, organizations, nonprofits, companies, corporates, individuals. So all of these different entities, they all have some kind of role in the value chain within the industry. So you can see, okay, well, where are the potential, ways for someone to enter? If there have been new entrants, and you kind of brainstorm and see, okay, well, this is the current value chain. And we took our business model in class, right? So you see, okay, well, are there any ways for you to enter into existing value chain or existing supply chain within the industry? And then which part, where? And so then you look at, okay, well, maybe there's an end-to-end process. I'm going to go work more on the consumer side, or maybe I'll work more on the supplier side or manufacturer side, or somewhere in between. So then you're kind of like connecting what you like to do with the actual opportunities. And within the industry, you can see, okay, well, their current market reports that will tell you what's the market cap, how big is the industry, because that's also going to be part of your pitch, right? Like, what's your market opportunity? If it's a big enough industry, if there's an opportunity to enter, let's say there are some inefficiencies or maybe some disruptions that you can add into industry, then you're going to go talk to stakeholders. Who has the problem? So you have this formulating these assumptions or hypothesis that somebody may have a problem here based on your research. So when you go out, you talk to them and you try to validate, is that a real problem or not? If it's not, you go find something else. If it is a problem, you can dig deeper and see, okay, well, based on that problem, what kind of solutions can you build, and can you build a business model to extract some of the value from existing value chain? Because in reality, you cannot outperform the industry. You cannot go everywhere initially. You have to start somewhere. So you need to find that sweet spot within the industry segment, sub-segment, with something very specific that you can potentially grow within the industry, and maybe take some other additional sort of value activities within the industry. So that's kind of like the general thinking. But of course, tailoring it back to your internal self, what do you like to do? Like, what are you passionate about? What makes you happy? Like, you get up, if you work on something and you feel complete, start there. And then see who needs this. Like, which industry, what sector, who might be interested in the products or services that you're passionate about. So I would internalize it more and then connect that with external research and opportunity analysis.
Excellent. So Amy has a great question, but it could have its own workshop or probably series of workshops. But maybe if we could get like a 3-minute answer. Amy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I'll actually tone it down also. And the general question was, how do you determine when you should bootstrap versus accept capital? But more specifically, if you're already going to bootstrap, do you continue to meet with these investors, right? Alina, you talked about how you wasted all your time meeting with these investors. Like, I'm starting a social impact company. Do I say, okay, I'm going to pick out all of these socially responsible investors, all of these impact investors, and start pitching my idea just to practice pitching or such? Or is that going to just totally derail me and make me lose my focus if my intention is to bootstrap?
I can do a quick answer. So if you're early on, you're just trying to establish network, that's okay to establish network. If those are the investors that will potentially invest in you, you have to be careful what you pitch, because you can start pitching one thing, then you're going to be changing, you're going to have something else. And if they see you coming in with the new ideas every now and then they might sound like you don't know what you're doing. So if you can have a set of practice investors that you're comfortable, you're just going to practice. There may be your friends, maybe there's someone just to give you feedback, but not actually invest in you. That's fine. So, you need to have like a guinea pigs, right? To test pilot your pitches. But at the same time, if you have potential investors, you want to get investment, it's okay to reach out, say, hey, I'm not interested in raising money right now. I will be in the future, but I want to present you my idea so you get to know. And then once you know something, when you have solidified, then you can give them updates and say, this is how much progress we've made. And so they see the positive side of it. Like, hey, you started with this small, now you're growing. So they want to catch you and put money in you before you get too high with valuation. So that's a little bit different perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Stephen, anything to add to that?
Sure. I would say, Amy, that having been on both sides on venture funding and having been part of a startup, I think that anything that sort of derails you from your core focus can be risky. The answer really lies more in you and your team. It's a hard question to answer. I would say that one of the things that, if it's seed fund or angel investor type investments, first, second round of investment, at least my criteria and the criteria that most people held when I was doing this type of work was, they want to see, if they can see you as an entrepreneur in action, it's more interesting for people. If you pitch, I have one data point, it's one dimensional. But if I see you pitch, then you're working, and then you have updates and you have advancements 3 months later, and I can see them on your website. I may be watching your website, you don't even know it. And I see it 6 months later, and then I see you're presenting at some sort of conference and you've got further advancements. And I see that there's alignment, that your team is growing, or that you're, even in a bootstrap context, you're progressing. Investors are investing really in you. They may think the idea is great, but there could be 100 versions of you out there. But they're really looking for progress. People anybody who has bootstrapped and has done the things that they have to save money, to move forwards beyond everybody's telling them, good or bad things, they understand what that's like. But the fact that you're progressing and moving forwards is really important. And those type of investors will watch you. I think at least it's important to network, as Alina said, but there's some aspect there of seeing forward momentum. The more you can let people know, hey, this is something we're doing. Hey, this is something new. This is something, is showing that roadmap as you're building it. It really does help, even within community, because people talk to each other. You know how those networks are. It's constant. Everybody's trying to figure out those answers, and the amount of horizontal discussion is gigantic.
Great, thank you very much.
And yes, and thanks everyone for attending.